And it's time to answer that fascinating question, what is the Sesame Street number of the day?
This orang spends 90% of her time in the trees. As the heaviest arboreal species in the world, orangs let their
The other day, I was arguing with someone online because I have this perfect blend of the idiotic desire to change the minds of strangers on the internet, as well as the egotistical belief that I am somehow capable of changing those strangers' minds, as well as a tendency to momentarily fall into the irrational belief that that is somehow productive action. As anyone who is engaged in the fine art that is internet arguing will tell you, it's a surefire way to quickly lose some faith in humanity. And well, as the title of this video might suggest, this interaction didn't exactly fill me with hope. During this, what I will call spirited debate, I found my opposition spewing a string of ideas and arguments so divorced from reality, I found I couldn't properly counter them without cracking open a third-grade history book and reworking our way from there. It quickly became quite clear to me that this person, for intentional lack of more delicate words, was stupid. With that said, I will now find those more delicate words, as I don't actually think it's fair to label anyone as stupid, no matter how vindicating it may feel. We are all just products of our environment, after all. I, for one, was extremely lucky to have gotten a, while public, pretty decent education, and to have grown up in an environment where I could care about learning and take the steps necessary to learn when I felt so compelled. These privileges are not ones enjoyed by all. However, whether you want to call it stupidity or ignorance, I think we can all agree that it's growing fast. People are getting stupider, and whether you like that fact or not, hopefully you find yourself firmly in the don't like it camp, but either way, we need to understand this trend, understand where it's coming from and what it means for our society. But before we can get into that, I need to offer a disclaimer. I am not an expert, and I actually think one of the many contributing factors to this increasing trend is the overabundance of people speaking with authority on subjects that they really don't have any right speaking with authority on. So let me make this abundantly clear. This is a piece of entertainment that contains my opinions. I hope that we can engage in more spirited debate in the comments down below. And hey, while we're here, if you enjoy the video, why don't you leave it a comment? Give it a like, subscribe maybe. It really helps out and I appreciate it. Now, without further ado, let's get into it with part 1. Have you ever watched the show The Young Pope? Yeah. Me neither. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about this show. I didn't even know it existed until clips of it started popping up on my YouTube homepage, YouTube Shorts recommended. Ever since short-form content rose to prominence, we've seen the subsequent rise of these chopped-up clips of larger pieces of media doing numbers on the timeline. I mean, I swear there was a good while there where me and everyone I knew watched the entirety of Young Sheldon through YouTube Shorts on our feed. I never really thought much of this. I mean, sure, it was people blatantly stealing content for personal profit, but as far as unethical ways to make money are concerned, this wasn't the end of the world. But my mind shifted recently when my algorithm decided to show The Young Pope was that new hotness and started promoting clips of it on my YouTube homepage. Now, I've been trying to wane off of all consumption of short-form content, but I'm a sucker for historical and political media, so when I saw Jude Law dressed to the nines in full papal getup, I had to see what was going on. Overall, this show didn't catch my attention enough to warrant sitting down and watching through the whole thing, but the premise was interesting enough. The show basically follows a fictional pope, Pope Pius XIII, who is elected as a compromise candidate between progressive and conservative factions in the Vatican, with his youth hopefully promising decades of stability and status quo. But as it would turn out, he was secretly a fanatical Catholic conservative and ends up being the champion of regressive reforms throughout the church. His fundamentalism is so intense that it borders on comical. In fact, it quite comfortably crosses that line. The show is very obviously a satirization of these fanatical beliefs. It's a comedy, really, more than it is a drama, a farce. Surely no one would take its exaggerated main character and premise meant to criticize radical conservative ideas as a genuine endorsement of those very ideas, right? Well, some of these comments on these videos are people unironically drooling at the idea of a real-life Pope Pius XIII, saying things like, "We need this in real life," and "if only." Now, this might feel like not that big of a deal, like, oh, radical, extremist right-wing people on the internet are misunderstanding a piece of media. I mean, that's nothing new. Just look at Star Wars. But what gave me pause was that the accounts posting this content were very often niche channels that usually posted propaganda slop for these very same Christian fundamentalist and right-wing ideas. Such slop barely gets any attention, but these clips drag in tens, if not hundreds of thousands of views. And crucially, these clips were never from the end of the show, where Pius ends up forsaking this regressive ideology, which stemmed more from childhood trauma than any actual form of zealotry, or from any of the various parts throughout the show where he makes a complete ass of himself. No, these clips are a collection of certified Pope Pius-based moments. God damn it. And I think that has dangerous implications. It means that no longer can you tell a nuanced story that showcases less than savory ideas for the purpose of breaking them down without people cherry-picking clips and posting them en masse to the internet to push an agenda. I mean, back when I was still on Instagram, I saw the same thing happen to the portrayal of British fascist Oswald Mosley on the show Peaky Blinders. And even beyond just the propaganda implications, telling any kind of nuanced story will only get harder and harder as media is increasingly consumed in short bursts. And I think this is just one factor in the worrying trend that is the decrease in media literacy in the United States. Media literacy is basically the ability to engage with a text, to scrutinize it in your head, to understand what messages are being sent, and to engage with them in an intellectual fashion. This can be directly tied to the nation's national literacy rate, which not only judges people's ability to read, but also the aforementioned ability to retain and understand texts. The number of adults in the U.S. who are considered illiterate rose from an already worrying 19% in 2019 to 21% in 2024. 54% of U.S. adults read at below a 6th grade level. So where does literacy and media literacy even come from? Is it something you're born with, a disposition to be better at reading? Well, no. Obviously, it's a skill which has to be taught, primarily in school, which brings us to part 2. Have you ever heard of the name Roger A. Freeman? He was an economic advisor to then-Governor and future President Ronald Reagan. You probably have never heard of him before, and he might just seem like another boring, bureaucratic American politician from the endless pile of those we have throughout history. But this man, well, to be honest, that's exactly what he was, but he's crucial for our story today. For some context before we get into him, in 1970, the average tuition of public in-state university in the United States was just under $400, with private sitting at about $1,700. In California at the time, public college was practically free, which was why during a 1970 press conference, Freeman warned that, and I quote, "We are in danger of producing an educated proletariat." For those who are not versed in economic and class terms, proletariat basically means working class. He's warning against the creation of an educated working class, a grave threat that, with this cheap access to higher education, had a real potential of coming to fruition. Now this is a big no-no to anyone who wants to pass anti-working class legislation while maintaining support from the very people it would harm. Legislation like the neoliberal policies of the Reagan era that continued through Bush, Clinton, and onward. And so, throughout all of these presidencies, Democrat and Republican alike, the price of higher education in the U.S. skyrocketed, going from that $400 for public in-state university in 1970 to nearly $10,000 in 2024, with private tuition raising from an average of $1,700 to $38,000. And these institutions, or I should say those who own these institutions, are making bank. But it wasn't just higher education that found itself the target of this war on education. The infamous No Child Left Behind and Obama-era Common Core thrusted standardized testing into primacy in grade schools, nominally seeking to set consistent, standards for primary school education. In practice, it made school less about learning and more about meeting a mark. And it penalized and continues to penalize any schools that miss that mark, most often being those that are already underfunded. But you will notice that in the title of this section, I put the word war in quotes. Why is that? Well, the truth is, at its core, the American education system was never primarily about learning in the first place. The modern form of schooling that we think of when we hear the word, rows of desks with a teacher in front, tests, grades, etc., was born in Prussia in the 1800s, after the end of the Napoleonic Wars. And its explicit function was to create obedient soldiers for the military, patriotic loyalists to the state. It was much more about indoctrination as it was about education. This style of schooling was then first brought to the United States in the mid-19th century, but it really rose to prominence in the early 20th. This fledgling modern American education system was massively influenced by billionaires like Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller, who poured billions of dollars into it through organizations like the General Education Board, with the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching basically creating the modern standardized test through the creation of the Educational Testing Service. The result is an education system that is built around cultivating obedience rather than learning. I want to finish this section with a personal anecdote. As I said at the beginning of this video, growing up I went to a public school. My district was pretty diverse, with people coming from all different backgrounds and economic standings, but overall, I would say it was pretty decently funded. Apparently not enough to pay the staff a fair wage, but I digress. In elementary school, I was the kind of kid who loved math. Math and science, those were my jam. I was sure I wanted to be an astronomer when I grew up, and in third grade, I was placed into the honors program for both English and mathematics. Which is ironic, because by sixth grade, I started dropping D's on math tests, a trend that would continue until I graduated high school despite my best efforts. As a result, I started to detest math, becoming more and more of an English and arts kid. And it isn't until now, years out from grade school, that I've started to rediscover my love for it on my own terms. And I can't help but think about how many kids share this experience, especially in less well-off areas, where the quality of public education being tied to local taxes is much worse. But of course, there is another major factor in the great stupiding that we can't ignore. Part 3.
And we are calling it iPhone.
I'm sure you don't need me to tell you this story. The story of this man and this device. So I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to have you tell yourself a story. Or, more accurately, remember one. Did you have a favorite set of toys as a kid? And when I say set, I mean maybe you had a couple of dinosaurs, or maybe some toy cars, dolls. Me, I had trains. And if you were anything like me as a young child, you'd eventually get bored of just smashing the dinosaurs together or racing the cars or trains, and you'd start coming up with stories. Or maybe you had a plastic sword or a stick that you pretended was a sword, and you'd make up a tale in which you were the hero saving the day. For most of us, these were the first stories we ever created. Can you remember any? Maybe just one story that you made up all those years ago? Why do we tell stories? I've thought about this question a lot, and I have a couple of answers, but for our purposes today, I have one. We do it because we're bored. Boredom is a driving force in a lot of what humans do. So much of our lives here on Earth is spent just finding things to fill the time. Beyond this, studies show that boredom is crucial for mental recovery while boosting creativity and idea generation. Boredom is an integral part of the human experience. But today, boredom has been all but vanquished. Vanquished by algorithms, always just a tap away. Algorithms that are quite literally physically addictive. But you can't blame the algorithms. You can't blame the phones. No, they didn't invent themselves, and they weren't some inevitable creation. No. These machines and algorithms are so addictive because addiction is profitable. And it goes beyond just our internet habits. Fast food, pornography, gambling, everything has become a drug because a hooked consumer base is a loyal consumer base. Loyal through everything. No need to maintain quality or health. And this is why everyone is getting dumber. It's the ultimate alignment of political and economic interests that are gutting our education system and frying our brains until we are too stupid and addicted to know what's good for us. So what now? That's how these video essays end, right? With a solution. You've probably seen videos on your feed of people espousing a phoneless lifestyle, imploring you to unplug from everything. And while I do think this can be a noble effort, and I even do recommend that you struggle against these addictions that are being levied onto us, as well as going out of your way to educate yourself. I myself have taken many steps towards those goals over the last year. We need to recognize that this is far bigger than any one of us. Like every issue that is plaguing our society, it is larger than individual action. This war on our brains won't end until political and economic power is in the hands of those who have the people's interest at heart. That is to say, the people themselves. So as always, this is James D. telling you to get out there, get organized, and keep fighting. Thank you for watching.